Hello again, whiskey friends. My name's Durell. Thanks for joining on another review slash, kind of little backdrop into the history of how I got into bourbon. It comes a little full circle with this review and the bottle that we're going to be talking about. This right here is a store pick from Yankee Spirit. So it's Redemption High Rye Bourbon. And the reason why I say full circle, the first bourbon I've ever got into was a Redemption product, or first bourbon I've ever owned. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Stick with me. Stay tuned. This one's going to be fun. Cheers. Thanks, guys, for sticking with me. So this Redemption High Rye Bourbon, a mash of 60 corn, 36 rye, and 4 malted barley. Coming in at 105 proof, non-chill filtered. They did proof this down because I'm pretty certain they have a high rye bourbon barrel strength or barrel proof product as well. But I was asked by my local store to do a little review on this bottle, and when they ask you to do a little review, you don't say no. So cheers to my guy, Jeff. I know you're going to be watching this. I poured up some already, and we're going to talk about, actually, so we can get into that now. And the reason why I say full circle, my man Jeff over at Yankee Spirits, this was the first bottle of bourbon that I've ever tried at that store. And it was the first one that I've ever owned, and this is going back to late 2019. To basically where I'm at now. So it'd be interesting to just pour that up and kind of compare. I know it's barrel proof versus non, and it's not the high rye version, but, to kind of dive back into that bottle, because I've honestly haven't had that in probably a few years, to be honest with you. So I poured a little bit of the high rye bourbon. Let's go in. Cheers. So right off the nose, it's sweet. So it's not coming off like ethanol forward at all. The proof point is only at 105, so you probably really wouldn't get that normally. But being at its high rye, I thought it would have came across a little bit more spicy, probably on a palate. I'll get that versus just nosing. But yeah, really sweet oak. Does come across slightly youthful. And when I say youthful, I'm thinking of just like balance, right? Like it comes across balance, but it just seems like it's maybe missing just something slightly, and that's probably just because of the age on this. But that nice sweet vanilla is great. And you get that infamous, that vanilla like graham cracker from the MGP. Redemption sauce is all there. Their whiskey, for what I know, from MGP. But yeah, this nose is nice. That typical MGP bourbon. All right, let's go in for a taste, guys. Okay. So I wasn't expecting that. Or maybe I was to an extent. So at 105 proof, this actually drinks around like maybe 110, a little above that. That high rye definitely plays into it. Gives it a nice spice on the mid to back of the palate. You don't get it so much on the front. Like the front's slightly muted to an extent. So like you'll take a quick sip. You don't really feel much. It almost like kind of like coats your tongue like water. There's not too much flavor on the front, but as soon as it hits the mid palate, like all that intensifies, and you just get blown up with like that vanilla, that sweet oak. It does come across like slightly youthful. Like you just get a couple youthful notes. Like it's not harsh. but you could just tell that the age isn't there, you know, but it's not bad by any means. Going back into the nose now, I get like this citrus note. It's almost like an orange peel maybe, but it's bright. Yeah, the sweetness of that vanilla shines, and you get citrus right out the back. This nose is nice. Like honestly, really no complaints. Like it could have more depth, but you know, for a young product, you're not really expecting that. So at the age that this is probably maybe a 3 to 4 year old product, you know, the nose is exactly where I think it should be. Just going for another taste. Yeah, so this whiskey, this shines mid palate and back of the palate. Like those flavors are very, very concentrated on the mid and the back. Like I said, up front, you really don't get that, which is kind of odd. Normally, some of those flavors would transition, or you would get some of the flavor on the front, then it just transitions, you know, as you work your way down. But it almost skips the front of the palate and just literally just sits on mid and back, which I'm not really mad about, but I think it would come across slightly more balanced and constructed if you were able to pull some of those flavors from the front of the palate. But the whiskey in its own it's pretty good. One more sip. He had just a very easy, drinkable bourbon. Like there's not really many cons, you know, besides, you know, some of the slight youthful notes, you know, and just the lack of the front of the palate, but you still get a lot of that flavor, you know, mid and back of the palate. It's pretty nice. And at, I believe, $49, you know, I'm not mad at that buy whatsoever. So let's do a little full circle comparison, you know, and it's funny, like this is literally that same bottle, you know, from almost 4 years ago, guys, that started the bourbon journey. This Redemption 9-year barrel proof at 108.2 proof, 75% corn, 21 rye, 4 malted barley. So the difference, this one's higher corn, 75 versus 16, but the lower rye, 21 versus the 36. So they flip-flopped that extra 15, gave it to the corn, took it away from the rye. And this is 9-year age stated. But yeah, it's funny. Like, I don't know how many of you guys have that first bottle of bourbon still, you know, that got you into bourbon. It's probably not many at all, really, you know, but like this bottle, and I don't drink much whiskey, so that's the only reason that I have it. And, you know, I got a decent amount that keeps me from kind of revisiting, you know, some of the older bottles. And I just tend, in all honesty, I just tend to forget what I have, you know, but it's fun to look back at this bottle and know that this was the first one I've ever owned, and it made me dive down that rabbit hole. So thank you again, Jeff, for making me go that way, man. Like literally used to just have some Crown Royal and some scotches. And as soon as I tasted bourbon, I was like, oh man. And at 108 proof, the first day I tasted this, guys, funny thing, I thought it was the hottest thing ever because I was so used to drinking 80 proof whiskey, you know, Jacks and Cokes and Crown and Cokes. I taste my first bourbon and it happened to be a barrel proof, and it like blew me up. I'm like, oh my God, how am I ever going to be able to drink this? You know, and most probably think the same, right? When you're gravitating or just getting into bourbon, right? Like anything over 80, 90 proof, you're like, oh man, this is hot. But your palate does change. It gets acclimated to these higher proofs. And I look at myself now, and when I go to 105, like this high rye, it just drinks so easy, which is not that far off of what this barrel proof was that blew me out, 3.5, 4 years ago. So your tolerance just builds up. The same with alcohol. The more you drink, although I don't say drink a lot, the higher your tolerance is going to get. And, proof is the same. So let's go into the nose of this, see how different it may be. Oh yeah. So yeah, immediately you could tell this is an older product. Just that oak is more refined, deeper, more rich. Yeah, the age shines versus the other one, but that's not an age stated, so you're not really expecting it to anyway, right? Let's go in for a taste. Yeah, this is good. I will say, on the palate, it doesn't remind me too much of MGP. This one reminds me more of that MGP profile versus this 9-year barrel proof. That's interesting. I don't know if it plays into the fact that I drank some of this right prior. I didn't rinse out. Maybe that could be it. But yeah, I don't get much of that MGP influence, that graham cracker, that heavy vanilla that I normally get. But on the nose, it's present. Yeah, just deep, rich oak, but it's a lot more balanced. This is a higher proof, but it almost is as tame as this one here, which is less proof. Let's go in for another sip. Yeah, that's funny. So I probably would not have thought this was MGP. I would like to try this again on a clean palate just to see, or even after rinsing out to see if that influence comes across. But it's really, really good on its own, but it just doesn't remind me of MGP on the palate. But all those flavors transition from the nose to the palate. So the heavy vanilla, besides the graham cracker, you get that heavy vanilla, you get that sweet oak, that age is present from that oak influence. But yeah, so MGP on the nose, but not so much MGP on the palate, which is pretty odd, but it's still tasty. One more sip, guys, and we're going to end it. Yeah, nicely balanced. I'll be curious to see how the high rye barrel proof version is in comparison to the high rye that I just did over here. But both of these good on their own. And what you would expect typically, right, from a 9-year, just say MGP product and maybe a 3 to 4 year non-age stated MGP product. They do have their differences, but they're as expected, from one another. Both good. No complaints. Like I said, maybe the high rye could have just maybe had a little bit more flavor on the front, but as it stands, man, that's a pretty good whiskey at $49. That's just a buy for me. Not mad about it at all. The redemption when I got this, I believe, was like $99. Honestly, haven't owned another one since, so I'm not sure what the cost is, but anywhere, just say between 99 to maybe 115, I would say it's probably worth it at that age. It's tough trying to find, 9 and 10-year-old, just say MGP nowadays at a decent price. So, right around that $100 that it was, or if it still is, then I think that's still a pretty good value for the type of whiskey you're getting. But that's going to wrap it up, guys. Kind of wanted to just touch base on that store, Yankee Spirits over here in Massachusetts, man. They treat me well. Great people, great store. And, like I said, when they ask you to, shoot a review on a bottle of theirs, got to do it, and it played in well with the redemption here, man. Because like I said, it's all just full circle, right? Just start with one bottle of bourbon, Now you have X so much, building these relationships, then them asking, to shoot reviews and pick barrels. Just, it's all about relationships when it comes to some of these stores, right? Like, not even necessarily the amount of money spent, just to touch on that, but just sitting there and just having conversations, right? Like, granted, I spent some money in these stores, but in the beginning, it was more so learning, right? Because I didn't know what a bourbon was 3.5 years ago. I just used to buy whiskey and mix it with Coke, but it was a big learning experience. I thank all my guys over there at that store, for just getting me to where I'm at now in terms of the knowledge, right? But not going to bore you with my history. Thanks, guys, for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed the review. Till next time, cheers.
Jeff, just be friends with me. But you have these whiskey friends, and you say hello again. Oh, Jeffrey, you should just be friends with me. But you have these whiskey friends, and you say hello again. Oh, Jeffrey, you should just be friends with me. But you have these